Next, we'll take a look at how deadweight loss relates to elasticity. So here we've got the same equilibrium as before, with a price of 14, a quantity of 60. And we're going to revert to our $6 per unit tax. So let's try it. Let's see if you can do this on your screen. Take a $6 height there and pick it up and jam it in between the supply and the demand curves. If you do that, you should end up with something like there. Something like there is going to be your $6 height. And so then where that's hit the demand curve, you can trace across. There's the price the buyers pay. Trace across from where it hits the supply curve. There's the price the sellers receive. And there's our tax revenue in there. And we've got this guy here. This little triangle that's missing is our deadweight loss. So there it is on a nicer picture. Now, what you should notice is this deadweight loss is smaller than before. How can you tell that for sure? Well, the base of the triangle is the same, right? Still that same $6, but the height of the triangle is smaller. We haven't gone all the way back to 50,000. We've only gone all the way back to maybe 55, 54,000, something like that. So we've got a smaller change in quantity, and hence a smaller deadweight loss. But there's actually another thing that we can notice here. With a smaller change in quantity, the number of units that we're able to tax is greater than before. So a lower elasticity for the demand curve, or the supply curve, but in this case the demand curve, a more inelastic demand curve means we get less deadweight loss and more tax revenue. So this is an important lesson that governments can learn, and one that they've actually taken to heart in a lot of places. The more price inelastic are those supply and demand curves, the smaller is going to be that change in quantity, and hence we get less deadweight loss and more tax revenue. Then we should expect that governments would want to tax goods with the lowest price elasticities of demand and or supply. But that's not the only thing that we need to take into account. We also need to take into account equity issues and the distributional consequences of our taxes. Let me give you an example here. Think back to when we first started looking at elasticity. Do you guys remember the product that I told you that I was very insensitive to the price of? It was milk. So milk is something that for me and for, well, lots of other people has really inelastic demand. We don't change the quantity that we buy very much as the price changes. So what we've just learned suggests that there should be a large tax on milk, because people will not change their behavior, they'll still continue buying the milk, the government will get lots of tax revenue with very little deadweight loss, very little efficiency loss. Can you guys see a problem with this though? Well, milk is not a big deal for me. I'm, a middle class person at this point, and so I can quite easily afford milk. I know it's a big humble brag there. If we take a look at people who have a lot more money than me, do they still drink milk? Probably. Would an increase in the price of milk matter to them? Yeah, probably not. Again, those people wouldn't care. But now think about somebody relatively poor. If we're going to tax milk, that tax ends up hitting the poor person just as hard as me, the middle class person, and just as hard as the rich person in terms of dollar amounts, but those dollars are much more valuable to the poor person, right? They constitute a much larger part of their income or their wealth than it does for me or, a rich person. So what this means is that the that by taxing milk, we force a larger portion of our tax burden onto poor people, onto the people who can't necessarily afford to pay for it. So there's distributional consequences of taxes matter. We don't, for example, want to have a progressive tax code where we tax people more as their income goes up, but then turn around and tax people a relatively large amount when they're poor by taxing goods that poor people buy a lot of, or that constitute a large chunk of their expenditure. So distribution and equity consequences matter. Whoops, what else? In a market economy, we allow people to buy things when they can afford them. Having more money gives you more stuff. But just because more trades are taking place doesn't necessarily mean that the economy is better off as a whole. If Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, two really rich dudes, go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff, that affects economic surplus in just the same way as if you or me went out and bought a whole bunch of stuff. But the true benefit to you and me may well be greater than the true benefit to those very rich people. Just looking at willingness and ability to pay in order to calculate economic surplus, consumer surplus particularly, is not necessarily going to be the right way to think about what's best for society. Thirdly, economic efficiency only cares about outcomes. We only care about who buys what. We don't, for example, care about how people get the money to buy things. But those means sometimes matter. We might care about how it is that people obtain the ability to produce or to consume things. And so what I mean to get across with this slide is economic efficiency is really all that we're going to be thinking about in principles of microeconomics. But I don't want you to take away from that the belief that that's all that economists care about. There's lots and lots of things that we want to take into consideration. It's just that at the principles level, we don't really have the tools to investigate these things very well. If you take more economics classes, then we'll examine more of these in more detail.